Our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, national NFL columnist for FanRag Sports. That's John McMullen. Looks by my count that we are 21 days, blackjack, 3 weeks, 21 days away from when training camp officially begins with the NFL always in view with our guy, John McMullen. John, how are you on this Monday before Independence Day, bud?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
Appreciate having you on. Of course, I always hate to start off with sad news, but your post today, and I saw it as well in some other places, the Eagles lost a former member of their family, their punter, and this was a guy, look, John, before John Telchik, before Jeff Fiegels, it was my guy, Max Runge, and I see that he passed away.
Yeah, it's always sad, and obviously Max was the punter for the first Eagles Super Bowl team, the Jaws club that lost to the Oakland Raiders. So, former draft pick, and even though those were the days back when the draft was 12 rounds, it's still pretty impressive if you were a kicker or a punter and you were actually selected in the draft as it is today. He was an 8th-round pick, and he was here for 5 years, and then he went on to San Francisco and actually got his Super Bowl ring. So he was with those Bill Walsh-era 49ers as well, and lasted over a decade in the NFL, and that's always impressive when you're able to do that. And 61 years old, it's sad. It's far too early for someone, but unfortunately, Eagles and the 49ers and the Cleveland Browns are all mourning the death of Max Runge.
And I did see that you had in your piece that he's going to try to help out the sport afterwards with that, the concussion issues and all that, like many players have done that have passed before him. He agreed to have his brain studied.
Yeah, it seems to be happening more and more, and we'll have to see exactly how Max died. All we know is he died in his car. No foul play is expected. I certainly hope there was not, anything intentional going on. We'll have to wait and see as that breaks. But, Boston University is very involved in CTE studies and how long-term repetitive hits affect the brain. And as people get older and we all know, we've all seen the results to this point. It generally doesn't look good for NFL players and people that put themselves through that. But I think it's kind of common sense to say if you get hit in the head a lot, it's probably not good for you. So from that standpoint, I think players have always known that playing in the NFL is kind of a cost-benefit analysis, and you're able to make a lot of money for a short period of time, and you have to sort of weigh that risk-reward. Everybody does it, and everybody does it every year.
John McMullen with us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. So we're 3 weeks away, John, until training camp, 21 days. Put yourself, be Doug Peterson for a second, or maybe Howie, and put yourself in their shoes and answer what's the biggest question mark that needs to be addressed once the bell goes off, the proverbial whistle goes off 3 weeks from now.
Well, I think we all look at this team, and there's a lot of optimism, and I think that's fans should be optimistic, but there's obviously some concerns. The biggest would be at the cornerback position on defense, where right now it's Jalen Mills, Patrick Robinson, and Rasul Douglas are scheduled to be the starters, really. When you think about nickel defenses or on the field more than base defense. So basically you have 3 corners on the field 60 to 70% of the time, and that's probably not good for the Eagles because that's their position with the least amount of depth, and certainly I think the question marks are going to start there, and I think the magnifying glass is going to be on Rasul Douglas very, very early because the Eagles got to find out pretty quickly if he's going to be able to play a lot week 1 of the NFL season. That's obviously the hope for this team.
John, how about a guy like Terrence Brooks? Is this a guy that can make an impact for the Eagles, or is he a guy that's still trying to find his way and you can't really count on him for much?
Well, I mean, it depends how you define impact. I think he's a very good special teams player. He's a very physical safety. The Eagles are very good at that position in the starting lineup with Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod, but there's not a lot of depth there. And he's a guy who probably outplayed Jalen Watkins in the offseason. And really, Terrence Brooks, you think about him, he's a physical player. So, if anything, he only gets better when the pads come on. So I think the fact that he kind of outdistanced himself from Jalen Watkins in off-season work, I think people should keep an eye on that sort of roster battle, because I think there's a very good chance if he continues that the way he played in the spring into the summer, that he'll be the third safety and not Jalen Watkins. But clearly the Eagles are very, very happy with the starters, and that's Jenkins and McLeod, and they should be.
Speaking of the secondary, John, I want to ask you, you look, going in the offseason, we all knew that was a position of weakness, a position they needed to address. And even though we're 3 weeks out from camp, it seems like they haven't done anything yet. And you've suggested on multiple occasions that they could maybe add another veteran, maybe late in the camp or halfway through camp. Who are the type of candidates that you look at who are out there right now, maybe like a Tracy Porter or somebody else, who you think they might bring in as camp and as the preseason goes along?
Well, I think their plan, and that's why I mentioned Douglas first off, is to see at least if there's going to be an opportunity or a chance to get him on the field early. I think that's the preference. That's the number one plan. If it starts being pretty clear early in camp, he's just overmatched, he's not going to be able to do it, then you got to start looking outside the organization. And I don't think we really know now. You can look at guys on the street like Alteron Burner who have big reputations, but they're not signed for a reason. I mean, the off-season rosters are 90 guys, so they're pretty bloated. So if you don't have a job right now, it's a pretty good indication that you're not going to be a real impactful player. So I think you would have to wait to see who gets cut. And remember, there's no cut from 90 to 75 anymore. It's one giant cut from 90 to 53. And there's going to be a lot of scrambling on that day. There always is when it's typically 75 to 53. That's one of the busiest days for a personnel department. Now it becomes even more difficult because you have so many players hitting the street at one time, and there's going to be some good football players falling through the cracks, but you just have to wait and see. The one name I would keep an eye on, because I don't think he's going to make it to the regular season in Chicago, is Kyle Fuller, former first-round pick. I think they've sort of given up on him, and that's a guy who's talented enough to say, you know what, let's give him a second chance. Let's see if a change of address, a change of scenery could sort of kickstart his career again. But there's going to be people out there that can help this Philadelphia Eagles team. So that's something for later when those cuts come down.
John, staying in the NFC East, Adam Schefter made a little bit of a stir today. He was on Sirius XM fantasy football show, and he inferred.
Stir in a fantasy. That's the first star ever coming from a fantasy football show.
Right, I know. So he basically was on the show, and they asked him about Ezekiel Elliott, what he would draft. He said, I don't know if I would draft him too high because of the NFL investigation. And he went on to imply that this investigation may lead to Ezekiel Elliott being suspended at least a couple games. And that, to me, is totally out of the blue news.
Well, not really. I mean, it's out of the blue from where he put it. And I think Adam was just taking it from fantasy football perspective and telling people to be careful if because obviously if you think about Elliott playing 16 games, he's going to pick up significant numbers for that aspect of it. And if he gets suspended, that's obviously going to curtail it. And, this investigation has been going on for almost a year, I think 11 months. So clearly the NFL has taken it seriously. So I don't think if Ezekiel Elliott eventually gets suspended, it's going to be out of the blue. In fact, if anything, they've taken their time. They've dragged their heels. They've dotted the I's. They've crossed the T's. In either way, whether it's cleared or whether he is suspended, it's, the NFL has been looking into it for a very long time.
John, other bizarre NFL news. Jeff Fischer says he wants to be back on an NFL sideline, which I find the most preposterous thing. I guess Jeff Fischer forgets, John, that he only had 6 winning seasons in 21 years. So explain to me and the audience why Jeff Fischer is under a delusion that nobody else understands.
I mean, if you don't believe it, who will? That's how I describe Jeff Fischer. So, I mean, you have to believe in yourself. I got a kick out because the Rams are on that Amazon show that just started streaming, the new one, which sort of goes through their first year back in Los Angeles. And one of the scenes they have is Jeff Fischer addressing the team at the beginning of the year saying, I know what I'm doing. He's telling the room that he knows what he's doing, that he coached in the Super Bowl, that he's won 13 games. And I'm like, I think I know what I'm doing when I'm talking about the NFL, but I don't stand in front of the room and say it. You just have a quiet confidence. And I always worry about people who tell me how brilliant they are. Just show me, basically. And that's, I'm with you as far as Jeff Fischer. I mean, the guy's he's not a terrible coach, but he's just mediocre. He is the quote that will always define him is 7-9 bleep. And that's basically what Jeff Fischer is. He's a 7-9 coach.
Hey, John DeShawn. I'm thinking of Josh on my head. Back to the Eagles for a second. We've talked about how much they need a down the field threat, and they signed Torrey Smith and they drafted Shelton Gibson. But Shelton Gibson has not impressed in the mini camps. He's dropping the football for what I know. If Torrey Smith doesn't pan out, are we looking at a season where, again, the Eagles lack that deep threat?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's better than it was in the past. You're right on Shelton Gibson. He struggled mightily throughout the offseason, and unless he picks it up really, really quickly, once they start up later this month, he's probably best case scenario for him is practice squad. He's not thinking about the 53-man roster. There are other, Marcus Johnson is a guy nobody talks about, but the Eagles are very high on. Could be a deep threat, but certainly not anybody you can count on. So if Torrey Smith plays like he did in San Francisco last year, it's going to be a problem. But while you say that, Alshon Jeffrey can get down the field. It's a different type of deep threat because of the size and his ability to get 50-50 balls. As I mentioned, you have Johnson, and you also have Nelson Aguilar, who had a tremendous spring. And who knows? Maybe the light switch goes off. But clearly, if Torrey Smith continues to play the way he did in San Francisco last season, it's not a good development for the Eagles.
John, I'm looking around the National Football League, and I see teams like the Jets, like the Browns, teams that still doesn't have that undisputed answer at quarterback. Yet you look at this upcoming draft class, and a lot of people are saying it's the year of the quarterback. It's the year of the quarterback. Whether that be true or not, do you see these teams?
They always say that.
Do you see these teams possibly lining up for, I don't want to say tank because I don't believe there's tanking in the NFL, but do you believe that they're looking towards this draft class as, okay, we're going to find a quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, everyone looks at the Jets and assumes they're tanking, and they probably are. I agree with you. There isn't high-level, long-term Sixers-like tanking in the NBA and the NFL, but there is sort of seasonal tanking, and the Cleveland Browns did it last year, and the Jets are doing it this year. Whether it works, obviously, you can look at the Cleveland Browns and say, essentially, they passed on Carson Wentz. They passed on every quarterback in this draft, whether it's Trubisky, or whether it's Patrick Holmes, DeShawn Watson. So for their 1-15 season, They didn't even get a quarterback. So it's always a plan you got to be very, very careful with.
John McMullen with us, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider and also a national NFL columnist for FanRagSports.com. And, John, you have an article up on FanRagSports.com about Aaron Rodgers and why he has success, linking it to the intangibles. And one of the things, and by the way, nice job of working Olivia Munn into the article. But one of the things that I took away from that article is, God, does Carson Wentz even have a sliver of what Aaron Rodgers has? Maybe 1/100th? Can you draw a parallel between that? Maybe you can also discuss what the article was about.
Well, I don't think it's fair to compare him to Aaron Rodgers. I don't think. I mean, Aaron Rodgers has the best skill set of any quarterback in the NFL, including Tom Brady. Anybody you want to mention. I mean, just from a physical standpoint, he's got the arm strength of Brett Favre. He's got the accuracy of Sam Bradford. He's got the mobility of just a tick under a Russell Wilson type. He's just physically, he's got everything. And then on top of it, he's got a high football IQ, and he's got what he talked about is tremendous confidence in his own ability. And that's the sort of intangible you don't know until you see it. And it's probably best defined when he made that famous quote to the Packers fans who were losing their minds at some point. He told them to just relax, and it all turned out to be fine. But if you want to compare any quarterback, and that's just Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, the quarterbacks I just mentioned this year, Trubisky, Mahomes, Watson, any of them. If you compare him to Aaron Rodgers, you're just whistling in the wind. It's not close. That doesn't necessarily mean they won't develop and become top-tier quarterbacks at some point, but it's just unfair, especially early in their careers.
John, why is it people are so jumpy when it comes to comparing guys to other guys? I know sometimes it seems like an easy out for us to kind of explain a guy's potential, but at times it seems like the comparisons, they just go way too far, and the expectations put on some of these players are just way too much.
Yeah, well, I think it's natural, but I think people don't understand. I think it makes sense to do comps, is what scouts call it, and say this, he's got a similar skill set as this particular player, whether it's Aaron Rodgers at quarterback or J.J. Watt or in the defensive line or whoever. But that comparable is not saying they're going to be the same player, just that they have that sort of athleticism or measurables or that thing. But that's kind of lost in translation. If you say Carson Wentz is going to be Brett Favre or Rodgers or somebody like that, people automatically latch onto that and expect it. It's not what you're saying. You're saying he's got arm strength, he's got mobility, whatever it might be. And I think people kind of get lost, as I said, in that translation.
John McMullen with us. John, you're a writer. You've been a writer. You write for FanRag Sports. You write for us on 97.3 ESPN.com. You see the landscape out there where everybody that writes content for Fox Sports loses their job, and then today the guy that fired them gets fired. Your take on that?
Well, we have to wait and see. I'll tell you this. It's supposedly due to sexual harassment allegations, but I will say the timing of it is very, very strange because Jamie Horowitz obviously just gutted the Fox Sports website, turned it completely video, and their traffic is essentially taken a nosedive. And all of a sudden, I will tell you, I'm not saying there's not allegations, but it's really, really awfully quick to fire a guy from allegations that just popped up essentially in the past week. If that's what Fox is trying to spin. So to me, and this is just speculation, I don't have a source on this. To me, look, there were whispers the guy was doing some things he wasn't supposed to do, and he also made one of the dumbest decisions in the history of sports media, and that kind of formed a perfect storm, and Fox got rid of him.
John, how can a move like this affect Fox Sports, especially in their relationship with the other sports, because of the fact that they had prepped FS1 and FS2 as this competitor to ESPN and to expand their platforms? They put the baseball games on FS1 instead of regular Fox. And now Horowitz's brainchild is sitting there without its father who created it. How can this affect Fox Sports moving forward?
Well, I don't think it'll affect them dramatically because he wasn't doing a good job. And they'll probably put somebody in there who's better equipped and probably makes better decisions. And if anything, in the long term, it'll help them. So I think people tend to dramatize these things at least a little bit. I mean, I hate to kick the guy when he's down, but he just fired a bunch of people. So you don't feel as bad from that standpoint. But again, it's like from the outside looking in, you say, this guy's getting paid a lot of money to make big decisions. And everyone said, this sounds like a really dumb decision. And it takes less than a week for the entire audience of that particular website to just stop going to the site. The traffic numbers were astonishing, the drops. And it literally happened immediately. And you say, if I know this, and I'm not supposed to be an expert, how does the expert not know this? So from that standpoint, in a business perspective, I got to believe Fox hires somebody who's better equipped to do the job. So I think in the long run, it'll actually help them.
John McMullen with us. We visit with him every day at this time. We'll wrap up with this one, John. Kind of lighthearted. This guy's been in the headlines right now, and I just saw this one pop up on my Twitter feed. Apparently, Christie spent $82,000 of state money on snacks at NFL games. They went back and looked through his debit card.
82 grand.
Yes.
I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you guys if you could shut down the beach for me, if I could come down by myself and just hang out on the beach, because I don't want to be bothered or anything. Yeah. So can that be accomplished?
I don't know if he can do it for himself. I don't know that he's doing it for anybody else right now, but he's John McMullen, our NFL insider and Eagles insider for 97.3 ESPN.com. Yeah, John says 2010 and 2011 seasons. This is where they went back to. 58 times he ran his debit card to pay for food and drinks, and the total bill for those two seasons was $82,594.
I don't know if that's a bigger black mark on the governor or how much everything costs in NFL games. I think it's 50-50 there.
That's true. It could be both ways. Well, John, we thank you for the time. As always, the Eagles training camp again officially starts 3 weeks from today. We are off tomorrow for the 4th of July, but John will catch back up with you on Wednesday on Hump Day to find out the latest in all things Eagles and NFL related. Have a great 4th, John. Thanks so much.
You too, guys. Happy 4th.